back a year ago.
All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Beer Bound podcast. Today we are joined by Joe Donnelly, marketing manager from Rascals Brewing Company in Dublin, Ireland. Rascals Brewing was founded in 2014 by Emma Devlin and Cathal O'Donoghue. The brewery is known for its wide array of beer styles, along with its interest in experimentation. Rascals has brewed all manners of wonderful beer, from Chardonnay Saisons to Mint Choc Stouts to Strawberry Vanilla Milkshake IPAs. Sounds amazing. This Dublin brewery has a brand personality which promotes fun, adventure, and the broadening of taste. So let's get into it. We welcome Joe to the Beer Bound podcast. Joe, how are you doing, sir?
Not too bad, Andy. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks for having me on. It's a privilege. Thank you so much. It's great to chat beer, especially on a podcast such as yours.
Wonderful. Well, the privilege is ours. I think maybe we'll start off. That was a very brief summary of you. I'm sure you have much more to say. Could you talk about yourself a little bit more? How you got associated with Rascals? Does your beer history go back a little bit further? Your love of beer? You're up, sir.
There's a couple of things. It's funny, I can pinpoint when I was converted to the world of craft beer, believe it or not. And I joined Rascals Brewing in September 2018, which is only 4 years ago. And before that, for 16 years, I worked in radio. That was my career. I worked as a producer and a presenter and ended up as a programmer in management in radio. And in that time, I also wrote for newspapers and did a little bit of television. So I was an all-round media person, you could say. I needed a career change. I might come back to that some other time in the podcast. But it was the summer of 2012, which sounds like the start of a song, a Bryan Adams song. It's not. But it was the summer of 2012. And I was doing a little podcast with a friend of mine, just to keep myself stimulated, because the radio role that I had at that time was a producer of a talk show, and I'm more of a music radio kind of person. So I did this podcast on the side to keep myself stimulated and to do something creative, to have a creative outlet. And my friend that I was doing it with, he introduced me to a craft beer. It was a red ale. And he said, have you had this? He was a very close friend. Have you had this red ale? And I was like, no, what's the story? He says, there's this craft beer thing, it's like, it's becoming really big, I was like, really? Okay, yeah. Okay, and I tried it, and it was a bottle of 8 Degrees, that's the name of the brewery, 8 Degrees Sunburnt Red Ale. And really and truly, that was the moment. That was my Damascene conversion, if that doesn't sound too pretentious, which it does, to craft beer, and I never looked back. And, I don't know why I didn't engage with craft beer prior to that moment. I drank, of course, but it was just mostly Guinness, which is obviously a big macro brand and very popular here in Ireland, or it would have been one of the mainstream lagers. So that was it. And I very quickly developed a fondness for craft beer. And like a lot of people, I dabbled in, the red ale was a gateway drink. And I dabbled a gateway style, and I dabbled in lots of other styles. And my love for it grew, and I was, as genuinely interested in the social enterprise aspect of Irish craft brewers. The David and Goliath aspect as well, because they were taking on the likes of Diageo, Heineken, and by extension, AB InBev and all these guys. And I became, because I had a bit of a profile publicly in Ireland at the time and on social media, with a blue tick and all that. When I would post a picture of a beer and I'd like, this is really good, I like this, the breweries really appreciated that because I had a bit of a following. And, I suppose I became maybe a de facto advocate for Irish beer, but completely on my own terms. It was just like, it was completely, I hate all that sponsored ad and all that kind of stuff. I'm not into that. So I did it on my own terms, and I became friendly in a way with Rascals by posting pictures of their beer, Little did I know that 4 years later, 6 years later, I would end up working for them. But that's kind of how it happened. I got to know them, and then they expanded their operations, and went from a small brewery in an anonymous grey industrial estate into a huge 30 hectoliter. Well, it's huge by Dublin standards. 30 hectoliter brewing facility and a tap room and a pizza restaurant and so on. So I don't know if that's a good enough abridged version, but that's how I ended up here.
Maybe you can take us through a little bit of the culture and the current state of craft beer in Ireland, because I've done a little bit of research on Ireland because I find it particularly fascinating. And I think I could have these numbers wrong, but it seems like some European countries with strong beer traditions, Ireland being one of them, except I'm not speaking about Ireland, other countries, seems like they're with such a strong and traditional purpose and association with beer. There's perhaps a little bit of hesitation to really enter into the world of craft beer because this is kind of an American trend. It's very new, and experimentation with beer that doesn't really jive with a lot of beer loving countries. But Ireland seems to be an exception, because it seems like, I think the numbers are, I think the craft beer world has really exploded. Like even in the past decade, I think Ireland had maybe less than 10 breweries, and now you're close to 100, something like that, which is insane in such a short amount of time. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how craft beer is attaching itself to Ireland, if it's doing so in a good way, if there's a little bit of resistance to it. What do you see?
Yeah, it's probably like the first Irish craft brewery was set up in the late 90s. It's called O'Hara's, and it was set up by a guy called Seamus O'Hara, and they're really successful now. They've done extremely well. Seamus is a good businessman, but really it's only in the past 10 years, maybe 11 years, that the Irish craft beer industry was properly born and grew. Literally 12 years, I'd say tops. 12 years ago was when it started. It exploded, and there was a massive steep rise, and then it plateaued, and then it dipped a little bit. And at one point, there was 103 breweries on the island of Ireland. Now, because of the pandemic and lots of other external forces, there's probably only about 60 really, properly active breweries, which is still quite a lot. If you think about it, there's 26 counties in the Republic of Ireland, and, there's at least one craft brewery in every county. Now, if you had said that to an Irish person even 10 years ago, they would have thought you were mad, because of two reasons. One, economically, how is that viable and how could it be sustained? And then two, something that you touched on in your question was, how do you convert people to drinking craft beer? The market share for craft beer in Ireland is tiny. It's about 3.8%. So that's quite small compared to the United States, which is pushing on 20% next year. It'll be 20% of them. Like, that's phenomenal. But it's much more mature than Ireland. We recently had Steve Grossman from Sierra Nevada. He's the global brand ambassador. He gave a talk at Rascals, and they were outliers for many years in the United States, but they've been on the go for, 40 years, so the United States, Australia, New Zealand, it's probably just that bit more mature. The market, the sector is more mature than Ireland. So we're a young sector, the Irish craft beer scene. It's a young enough sector, and there's a long way to go to increase the market share. The challenge is, where we are right now, there's a couple of different ways of answering that question. I suppose, firstly, I should say that the past 3 months has been really challenging for craft beer in Ireland and in the UK especially. The rising costs of doing business has seen a number of breweries close down, which is sad. It's awful news. Energy costs, even the price of cardboard, for example, has shot up, and you need that for your packaging. And then also we discovered, we feel that people are drinking less in off trade, cans, off licenses, that has really gone down, particularly since August, to the extent like that it's a very noticeable drop. So that has really affected, just 2 weeks or last week, what a really beloved Irish craft brewery announced on Twitter they were closing down. I was stunned. I mean, they would have been one of the breweries that I first tried, they've been around for a very long time. So at the moment, we're going through a stormy, choppy seas at the moment for Irish craft beer. From the Rascals' point of view, we have our venue, which is a big, huge restaurant, and it's a venue, and we do events. So thankfully, we've got that other business, so to speak, which is a lot more robust. But at the moment, we're going through a choppy period. Now, that's not to say that the Irish craft beer sector has enjoyed a lot of success over the past 10, 12 years. And people have embraced it, absolutely. People have embraced it, but it's taken a while. And in Ireland, I don't know about Canada or the United States or even the UK, there are a couple of reasons why people don't try craft beer. This is based on a focus group that I was involved with. And even though I know a focus group isn't like a massive sample, but I can tell you now, just because I'm no spring chicken and I've been around the block, I know this to be true. So the main reasons why people don't go to craft beer: one, it's too expensive. So, okay, that's a fair point. You can go in and you can buy 20-pack of Budweiser or something and it's much cheaper. Fair enough. Okay. But, I would say, well, then it's up to us as a sector to point out and to illustrate that our production costs are higher. And that's why we have to put a premium on our product. Plus, you're getting a better quality product than Budweiser or Heineken. So cost is one thing. The second one was a perception that craft beer is really, really strong and you'll have a really bad hangover the next day. And, I can't do that. So we have combated that. Every Irish craft brewery has at least one sessionable beer in their core range. Do you use the term sessionable?
We do. Yes.
Yeah. So sessionable beers are really important to have, 4%, 4.1, whatever, because people can drink it and they'll feel okay the next day. And then the last reason of the three, which I think is the most interesting and could potentially be the biggest challenge that has faced the Irish craft beer sector and maybe across the world, and that some people within our sector refuse to acknowledge or refuse to address, and that is people don't speak craft beer. They think it's pretentious, inaccessible, full of dorks. The comic book store in The Simpsons, the guy who runs that? Like, that's what we're dealing with, is a perception that, well, I don't speak craft beer. What's he talking about? Mouthfeel. Like, oh, God, hazy, what the heck? And there's an elitism in craft beer. There absolutely is, that, doesn't need to be there. I'm not saying it's not, certainly you can't define the sector by that. There's elitism and snobbery in all sorts of things, in food, in alternative music, whatever, But I think this is a drum that I often beat, and I feel strongly about it and passionate about it, that we need to be more accessible. We need to explain our beers better. We need to explain what goes into them. We need to explain the brewing process. We need to give people solid reasons to convert from a pint of Guinness or a pint of Heineken to asking for local beer. What local beer do you have? And if they don't have it, can you get it in on tap? We have to break down the perceived barriers between the consumer and the brewers and make it something that people will actually want to be a part of. We noticed something during the pandemic, which was astonishing. We became online retailers overnight. We had no choice but to sell our beer online. We couldn't open the venue. All the pubs were shut. So we had to quickly adapt and make sure our web shop, which previously had sold maybe 4 or 5 orders a month, was now coping with about 340 orders every month. The average was 330 in 2020, 330 orders. Now, trust me, that's big numbers for Ireland, I suppose, especially when people had never really bought beer online before. So we had to do that. And because in our case, and we saw it with other breweries, because we had such goodwill from people, and because Irish people, I think by nature, during a crisis, want to help out, we won a whole load of new customers who would not have drank craft beer because they wanted to put their hands in their pockets and support a local business, support a local employer. So in a curious way, it's an ill wind that blows no good. And the pandemic, although it was absolutely awful in so many ways, I think we actually benefited in converting a lot of people because they wanted to support Irish businesses and Irish breweries.
Yeah, those themes and those patterns, they're basically identical to what happened in Canada. Yeah, exactly. Sort of this movement of, well, everyone's stuck indoors, this movement of supporting local, small businesses are hurting, kind of one of the front runners for small businesses in Canada are craft breweries, just because it is a thriving industry, and it is a nationwide phenomenon. Like, as you mentioned, in Ireland, every county, all 26 counties have craft breweries. Like even small towns all across Canada, most towns have craft breweries. Yeah, it's pretty intertwined in our culture, I would say, in the past couple of decades. I wanted to ask, I'm jumping a little bit, Joe, but I want to ask a little bit about I want to ask about Guinness. So I can't really think of another country that has such an association with a particular beer. Probably none to the degree that Ireland has with this particular beer. Now, do you see this in the craft beer world that's really exploding and doing quite well in Ireland? Do you see this massive behemoth that sort of looms over your island?
Yes.
for better or for worse, do you see that as a positive force in stirring up the image of Ireland as a beer loving nation, and that can sort of splinter off into this subsect of craft breweries, and maybe you can kind of latch on to the tourism that Ireland gets because of Guinness? Or do you see it as antithetical? Do you see it as craft beer is really kind of raging war against Diageo and Guinness?
That's a great question. I mean, how long do we, like, seriously, we could talk.
We got time.
It's a great question, and I don't want to be like a politician, but yes, I think undeniably Guinness is a positive force for tourism in Ireland. Undeniably. For 3 years in a row, the Guinness Storehouse is the most visited tourist attraction on the island, in the Republic of Ireland. Now that speaks volumes for the marketing that Diageo have done with Guinness, for the brand. Like, it's almost unbeatable. Like, it's almost like they're almost embarrassed by the success of the Storehouse. And I know this because, believe it or not, I've been at meetings up in the Storehouse for our community in Dublin 8, us and other businesses. We have a great relationship with the Storehouse. I made it my business to have a good working relationship with our bitter rivals, because why wouldn't we? And also, we make them look good. Them being kind and giving and working collaboratively with the local brewery makes them look great. It makes them look like the good guys, which they are, really. I mean, anyway, I'll come back to that in a second. So yes, Guinness is a positive force for the perception of Ireland. I don't mind it. You know, there's a lot of people would feel that it's a bit cliched, it's a bit hackneyed, and it reinforces stereotypes. You know, the funny thing is, here in Ireland, we will complain a lot about how other countries, the United States, particularly the English, stereotype us, and we get really offended and up in arms. And yet, any visiting head of state, the first thing that's fucking put into, is that okay? Yeah. So the first thing that we put into their hand is a bloody pint of Guinness, you know, like, so you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't on one hand give out about, I wish the English would stop saying we're a bunch of drunks. And then the Queen comes over and like, here, have a pint of Guinness, ma'am. You know, like Obama, all of them, you know, that's what we do. So we need to first answer those questions ourselves as a nation, you know, as a political class, as a society. Are we happy to do this? Should the, you know, we literally bring people to the Storehouse. It's the first place. Emmanuel Macron, you know, famous Hollywood A-lister. So that's something that we need to look at, you know. There's no point in complaining about it if we continue to do it. There is no doubt that, of course, the knock-on effects for tourism are immense. Hotel bookings, transport, food and drink, hospitality, you know, it's brilliant. Absolutely. You know, there's no question about it. Guinness is good for Ireland. The other side of it is the fact that the Irish craft beer industry competes with Diageo, the British company that owns Guinness and Johnny Walker and various other brands. And we compete with Heineken. So how does that manifest itself? You know, it's an uneasy kind of battle because of two reasons. One, everyone loves Guinness. So you pluck any head brewer from any craft brewery, and the first drink they'll have in any pub or hotel, if they don't have craft beer, is Guinness. because, and I mean, God, I shouldn't say this, but you know, a nice pint of Guinness is hard to beat. It really, really is. Okay, like it's a good drink. You know, I'm going out tonight to my local pub and I'll have a few pints of Guinness. Well, there's nothing else, you see, right? So there's this sort of uneasiness that, you know, oh, Guinness the enemy, but oh, give us a pint of Guinness, please. You know, like that's the fact. What I would say, and we have found our workings with Diageo and with the Storehouse, you know, and the Guinness Open Gate Brewery, which is the Open Gate is a little small project, a side project where it's kind of like, it's their a sort of answer to, oh, we better do something involving craft beer. So they put on their own craft brews. But I will say this, they have had Rascals on tap there. They have, yeah, like they've reached out to Irish breweries and they've put their products on tap, which is a no insignificant gesture to make. You know, that's an extremely decent thing to do, and credit to them. And that's why, you know, I don't have any huge issue with Diageo, you know, like the enemy. I don't think we need to see them like that. But sorry, what I was going to say to you, there are practices that go on. Sorry, there are allegedly practices that go on with the likes of Heineken and perhaps Diageo. And what they do, apparently, I've been told, someone said, to keep craft beer taps out of pubs, they'll go in and they'll say to the public, and hey, listen, we'll give you we'll build you a new beer garden. We're going to give you this lovely patio furniture. We'll give you 6 months credit. We'll throw in 4 free kegs. Just, you know, take out that, just, you know, put them on tap. Now, so that goes on, apparently. And those practices, whether we like it or not, are part of the playing field. So, you know, a lot of Irish breweries will rightfully complain about that, about those practices. Rightfully so. It's pretty sneaky. You know, it's pretty sly. You know, they have buckets of money, like unbelievable amounts of money compared to, for marketing and so on, compared to Irish breweries. But that's the playing field. We have to get on with it. We have to develop our own relationships with publicans. You know, like I'll never forget, there was a friend of mine, he's an actor, but obviously he works in the bank. And I said, how do you find, like, is it not really hard, like trying to sell insurance or whatever it was? You know, and he says, Joe, if people trust you, they'll give you their money. It's as simple as that. So we have to develop trust and, you know, relationships with our publicans. We have to show them, listen, it's worth going with us, even from a PR point of view, rather than accepting the windbreaker from Heineken and the barrels from, you know, Jameson or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like we have to, it's our problem to solve, because they're not going to desist. You know, for instance, Heineken recently acquired Lagunitas, and suddenly there was Lagunitas taps all across Dublin, but at the expense of Irish breweries. But, you know, the publican was going, oh, great, I have a craft beer on tap. That's fine. You know, do you know what I mean? Like, it's really hard. I'm not saying it's easy to do this, but we have to just work as hard as we can to convince the publicans to take us on. So to come back to the sort of the Guinness thing, I mean, again, when I said we could talk for hours, like Guinness is as much a cultural institution in Ireland as, God, dare I say it, like the Book of Kells or Ulysses or U2, the band, you know, or like, oh God, I don't know, like Brendan Gleeson or something, you know, like, speaking of Brendan Behan, a famous Irish playwright and author, one of his lines, oh no, it wasn't Brendan Behan, or was it? Or maybe it was Flann O'Brien. It was Flann O'Brien, who was a satirical writer, really, you know, unique character. He said once, a pint of plain is your only man. And it's a very Irish way of saying something is great, you know, it's your only man, meaning that's really good. And most believe he literally meant a pint of Guinness, plain. So plain porter, stout, pint of Guinness. Like, that's often quoted. The Guinness advertising, of course, I'm sure you're aware, Andy, like that, and your listeners would be aware that, like, Guinness advertising is now revered, hallowed. God forbid if anyone gets it wrong, you know, going back. I mean, I would hate to you know, to have the account for advertising Guinness for their TV ads. I mean, the pressure to live up to what's gone before, the famous ad with the horses and the surf, black and white, with the music from left field, you know, like, but even going back before that, like, yeah, it's iconic. It is iconic. I wouldn't begrudge it. I don't think Irish craft brewers would begrudge Guinness. It's at times uneasy but it's probably good that we have it. Is the very, very short way. It's probably good that we have it. That's the best way I could put it.
That was really well said. Yeah, I totally agree. It's kind of, I think I could let you speak about that for hours. It is such a massive institution for your country. And I like what you mentioned about you don't like being stereotyped in connection with Guinness, but it's kind of hard not to sometimes because it is, no matter what you say, it is a part of many individuals' lives all across the country. Yeah. Something that you touched on that I am always curious about, and your particular role at Rascals, I think, is perfect for this question. You're in the marketing side of things. I was speaking last week to two gentlemen who run craft breweries in Greece. They said they were in Athens, so they said their clientele was a little bit different, but they said most consumers of craft beer in Greece, a lot of them will be found on the islands, and there'll be a lot of American tourists. It's more of the tourist crowd that's really interested in craft beer. In terms of you, do you see that as when you're marketing your product, when Rascals is trying to put out its image out into the world, who are you throwing this out to? Are there particular targets? Do you see particular demographics that really latch on to craft beer as opposed to others? In Canada and the United States, it's really complex. I find it's not so easy to pinpoint. We spoke to some economists about this as well, and how your typical craft beer drinker is maybe more connected with maybe the way an individual would look at wine as opposed to someone who would look at Heineken or Budweiser necessarily. But that's not always the case. Like it is changing and adapting, and this is kind of a new industry, and that is quite novel in its existence. So I just wanted to get your sense of how you view your product and how you try to cast this out to the world, if that's a way you look at this, or if it's a little bit more nuanced.
No, it is a way we look at it. Like it's a way that I think I have to remind myself constantly to look at. When you get bogged down in, small day-to-day stuff, or, events at the venue, or, coming up with a name for the new monthly pizza special, it's easy to not forget, but it's easy to not pay as much attention to your core activity, which is, which for me is winning new customers and converting people to Rascals. Like there's that marketing diagram, the funnel, where they sample and et cetera, and eventually you've got loyalty, and eventually you've got advocacy, where someone is going, they're tweeting, "Oh, love Rascals, you should try this." I see that a lot, which is great. I mean, for me, I do take a lot of pride in what I've done since I joined 4 years ago, and I think there's been a huge change for Rascals. And what I've noticed is that we serve the beer community in Ireland very well. So, in other words, there's a sizable cohort who are very active on social media that want to endorse Irish craft breweries. They're normal people, and they don't work in brewing. They work in whatever. They're consumers. They're fans. They're quite a significant enough cohort who will buy everything you produce. They'll try it out, and it's brilliant. So I always keep them in mind. Firstly, I want to make sure we get some nice reviews and tweets and Instagram posts and so on. They're an important part of our customer base. With Rascals, what I've noticed, and I think because of the tone of the marketing that I do, I would say, have a slightly younger demographic than perhaps some of the other craft breweries. So we would be perhaps more 25 to 34, and really evenly split on the gender balance. 50% female, 50% male. I get all this data mostly from Instagram. Instagram is probably our most active platform. We've 18,000 followers. It's a very, very active platform for us. It works really well. TikTok also works really, really well for us. So I get a lot of data and instinctive stuff from people's reactions, from comments. I keep an eye on it to the point of being neurotic. I should say I'm a one-man department as well. We don't have a social media manager. I do everything. Okay. So that's good and bad at times. But anyway, I would keep on an eye on all of this stuff to the point of being neurotic about it. We have 8,000 subscribers to our newsletter, our email marketing. That tells me a lot of info as well. And there's some great data you can get from MailChimp. Other providers are available. So, you can find out a lot. There's no shortage of data that you can get really quickly and really easily. So to me, we have really made an impression on young professionals, a little bit of a disposable income. Dublin is a very expensive place to live these days, but they have a little bit of disposable income. They like cool things. They like our tone. They like literally the design of our cans. They like the sort of flavor styles, the little sort of twists we do. For example, one beer is a hybrid of American Pale Ale and a Belgian wit beer. It's a white IPA and it has the Belgian yeast, but it has American hops. They like that kind of thing. I hope, and I believe we're accessible. Certainly my messaging always tries to be, I use colloquial language and, slang and self-deprecation, that's really, really important. And, it's you've brought me to something that I was really fascinating in the podcast episode you did with Glenn Carroll, that word is authenticity. And it's funny because this goes back to when I was working in radio. And when I was managing in radio and coaching presenters and so on, like the key word that I kept saying was authenticity. You have to be authentic. You cannot, you can't go on air and go, hey, well, that was, Black Eyed Peas. And yeah, I was just chatting to Fergie the other day. And she said, hey, I love the show. I said, people would prefer if you go on and go, oh, that was the Black Eyed Peas. Oh, my God, I fell down my stairs this morning. I was so tired. And Jesus, my cornflakes went everywhere. People want to know that you are like them, that you are authentic. And in beer, in craft beer, your tone of voice as a brand is so important. And if you're authentic, and you make a mistake in your tweet and then you quote tweet that and go, oh my God, well, not enough coffee yet. Jesus, sorry about that, guys, or whatever it is. There's a multitude of ways in which you can be authentic. I mean, it shouldn't be very self-conscious either. You have to find your authentic tone of voice and just stick to it. But don't try and be something you're not, or I feel really comfortable setting the tone for Rascals. It's great. I mean, I consider myself so lucky that I've ended up in this job that suits my sense of humor and suits my copywriting style and all that. So, people respond well to that. So that's why I think we've also connected well with the 25 to 34s, millennials, and Gen Z. Are they over the late? No, Gen. Yeah.
Some of them are over 18. Yeah.
Yeah, like we of all the Irish breweries, we would be the only one currently very active on TikTok. And that's instantly you go, oh, okay, that's how this platform works, right? And yeah, it's amazing.
I totally agree. And I think that's a big advantage that craft brewers have over the big guys, is that when Guinness goes to make an ad,
absolutely,
they're thinking we're making a Marvel movie. Whereas when Rascals goes and posts something on TikTok or on Instagram, it's more of like, this is reality TV. And that's a little bit more of what the millennials and the Gen Zs are really kind of used to now.
When I pay a videographer to go and do a really nice slick video for the venue, with sunlit shots of people having pints and eating pizza, and it's really no traction whatsoever on social media. I could have a 7-second video of a waiter or waitress knocking over a pizza, 60,000 views.
I think I like what you said too. Self-deprecation does quite well.
Yeah, but once it's real, and I can tell you this much, it's real because like I said, I'm no spring chicken. I don't care. Like I have 2 teenage sons. I've lost the ability to feel shame. I'm not embarrassed about anything anymore. So I bring this to the work and I go, guys, let's do something. If it doesn't work, so what? Let's not overthink it. Like, let's just try this video. Who cares? It's fine. No one died. Unless someone died, in which case,
then maybe you want to censor that. But yeah, exactly. Well, on top, I'm coming back to a theme a little bit. We talked about Guinness, obviously. There's another massive cultural piece of identity that exists in your country that I wonder how you look at this and how you adapt to the market. And that is the institution of the pub. Now, I always say I see craft breweries now in the United States and Canada. I see that now as kind of the nouveau pub of North America. We didn't really have this strong, like pubs exist, but it's not the same thing. I'm sure you're aware. So, and there are bars and dive bars, but again, different sort of thing. I think craft breweries have sort of replicated the idea of the pub a little bit, being accessible to everyone, being a social place where you can go and it's friendly and warm and cozy. I sort of see that as sort of a North American. We stole that a little bit, that sense of the pub, and brought it here and mixed it with obviously different flair, because it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, you obviously have that strong institution in Ireland. Is that something you're competing with? Maybe more with the older generation than the new? How do you see that?
I definitely wouldn't think we're competing with it, because we getting taps in pubs is such a huge thing. It's a real metric for success, and we have some great support in Dublin for Rascals and for Irish breweries. Like, I would say that the success of the Irish craft beer sector would not have happened without the support of so many publicans and so many pub owners, groups or individuals. We want to be as much a part of the pub scene and the pub atmosphere and the pub cultural tradition as a pint of Guinness or a toasted cheese sandwich. Like it is as simple as that. Here's the thing. Rascals, our tap room in Dublin, is still the only pizza restaurant and tap room and brewery in Dublin. There is another brewing place over on the other side of town, which I don't know if they're brewing on site, but really and truly, like, in New Zealand or even in Oregon or Seattle or whatever, like, there's one on every corner. Okay, there's one on every street corner: brewery, tap room, pizza, whatever, wings. That hasn't happened in Dublin yet. It will be a long time, I think, before we see a multitude of them. So that means that we coexist peacefully with pubs, and if anything, we can contribute to the cultural tradition of the pub, because now we're bringing Irish brewed beers, especially the local aspect. I'll give you a good example. Our suburb where we are in Dublin is called Inchicore, and we have been made feel so welcome by the pubs in Inchicore. There's a pub nearby called Slats, and it sits in the middle of a housing estate that goes back to the 1950s, or maybe the 1930s or 40s, that was built to house railway workers. I hope I have this information correct, because nearby was one of the largest railway hubs going back to Victorian times, because obviously the British would have built it. So obviously there was a huge employment there over the years, not so much now, but it's a very old working class estate. Really lovely people. I'd often go for a walk around, and I'd have a Rascals t-shirt, and someone would pass by and go, "Oh, Rascals, here you, I'll be in for pizza later," and you're like, all right, cool, man. But Slats is a pub that's in the middle of it, and it's just so authentic. It's like a Roddy Doyle novel, It's brilliant. But the owners are absolutely sound, like just really, really good, decent people, and they support us. Now, they would have a hard time selling a pint of sessionable pale ale to some of their regulars, like guys who might be in their 60s and they've only ever drank Guinness and maybe a hot whiskey. And, I think it's really funny and really interesting, and such a brilliant sign that, like I said earlier, there's a will to support Irish businesses, small, medium enterprises. So the pubs have been really welcoming, and generally they are very welcoming for Irish craft beer. So no, it's a scene that we absolutely want to be a part of. Yeah.
You really are an institute. So you are a brick and mortar spot where folks can come and have pizza and have beer. And you mentioned how difficult it is to send your product into different pubs or different institutions, just because that market's pretty heavily influenced by Diageo and Guinness and the big guys. Is that something you do focus on, chipping away at that market to get your product into other locations in order to spread the word on what you folks are doing? Or are you really doubling, tripling down on being a spot that people can come to and enjoy your brick and mortar? Is it something that you really do desire to kind of eventually break through and be able to spread your beer maybe to different counties or and as far as you can possibly reach?
It's definitely 100% both, and we absolutely want to have more and more taps. It's just such an important thing to do. We want to be, we want to be the dominant beer in craft beer in Dublin. We want to be on tap throughout Dublin city and county. Thankfully, we do have taps in Galway and in Cork and the southeast and so on, Belfast. But you have to keep chipping away at the taps. We have a sales manager, Paddy, and he's great. He's out there on the streets, so to speak, and knocking on doors and trying to get taps in. And that's the old fashioned way of doing it. But like Andy, that's the most effective way to do it. Build relationships, build trust face to face. It's really hard. Like you can win a tap and lose a tap. It's the leaky bucket metaphor that's used in sales. You'll always get new customers coming in, but you're always going to leak some out. That's just the way it goes. And it's the same with taps. You could win 3 taps, and then someone might come to you at the end of the week and go, listen, I'm sorry, but we're taking out your, because we got something else coming in, or whatever the case. Oh, it's not selling. These things happen. So we absolutely are continuing to try and get as many taps as possible. Because look, it's as I'm sure you can imagine, there's a really good margin in taps, in getting draft beer. It's a great way to stay healthy, to stay in the black, and then with our venue, what we've realized, and this is a real post-pandemic situation, and we didn't see it coming. It's funny, like this is you're learning at every bloody minute in this business. Post-pandemic, and certainly since August, since the end of the summer, people have changed their social habits, their socializing habits. We've discovered that you really need to give people a reason to come out and to visit you and to spend money with you. You have to provide something. You have to give them an incentive. Pre-pandemic, Dublin people and Irish people would socialize a lot and almost religiously, Friday night, Saturday night, maybe Thursday night and maybe the odd Sunday as well, just to have the cure. But now, in the post-pandemic thing, I think maybe people, who knows, they might have decided they want to be a little bit healthier. They might not have as much money. I mean, everyone is suffering at the moment from the cost of living and the increases in the cost of living. Maybe is it the fact that there's a lot of competition? Yeah, there's a lot of competition. A lot of venues now, a lot of pubs. We're all back open. We're all looking for a percentage of what could be a smaller pie. So events now is a huge part of what I do and a huge part of what we do in Rascals. So we're doubling and tripling down on the venue as well. Absolutely, because that will pay the bills at the end of the day. If you can run a venue successfully and you can fill it out on nights that are typically not as busy, so a Sunday night or a Wednesday night, because Friday and Saturday are busy anyway, then we'll be doing well. So now I'm putting on all sorts of events, and that's really interesting. And again, it's like, I'm pivoting again in what I do, like within the role. Events now takes up a huge part of my time, but it's very rewarding, particularly when something sells out. You're like, oh, that's brilliant. Everyone's going to come to that.
You mentioned, Joe, that you have taps, or one tap at least, in Belfast. Do you have any particular knowledge on how difficult that is? I know the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland is maybe a little bit special, but going international, even to the UK, like even to England, would that be something that would be quite daunting, or is that something on the horizon for you?
Export is important, but export requires a huge amount of work. It's a whole other revenue stream that you'd want someone almost dedicated to. There are a couple of Irish craft breweries that do really well on export, but they're focusing on that. So we're not, because we just, we don't have it. You have to make a choice. With Belfast, I don't know. Now I don't know. We had a couple of taps up there, and we'd a pub called the Sunflower Pub, which was really supportive. I actually don't know right now at this minute if they still have a tap, but they have been in the past. Now, I think Brexit obviously affected the situation because, you know, we would effectively be exporting to a non-EU country. So I don't know. I'd be lying if I said I knew exactly what form that takes now, whether it costs us more or whether it's not worthwhile. I imagine it's not really worthwhile. We used to export to the UK to a beer subscription service over there, and with a couple of really nice orders from them. That seems to have stopped now. Again, it could be Brexit related, or it could be, you know, they might have seen a fall in people consuming off trade as well. With Belfast, yes, of course, there's the political history. I don't think that has ever come into play. You know, I don't think that's ever been an issue or ever raised. I think the pub scene in Belfast is very different to Dublin. And I'm just giving my own opinion here. So if there's any listeners from Belfast, please forgive me. But the last time I was there out socializing was, I guess it was probably 7 or 8 years ago, and I was struck by how quiet the city centre was, or the wherever it was where all the pubs were. Pubs and restaurants, completely nothing to do with politics. Just, you know, the part of town where you go out for a few drinks. And the barman said, "Oh, it's really busy tonight." And I was like, really? Shit. And I feel that decades of the Troubles led to people not really socializing in the same way that people would in Dublin or Cork. You know, let's jump on a bus or into a taxi and off out to the city centre. You know, they would have stayed in their suburbs. This is a very uneducated opinion. So again, I don't want to, you know, it's just my own feeling about the situation, like that's what's happened. So consequently, it's very atomized socializing in Belfast. You kind of stay in your own kind of neighborhood. So that would be very hard to get penetration for taps, you know.
Joe, what's your favorite style of beer?
The beer nerds will just roll their eyes at this. I love a New England, you know. I love a New England IPA. There, I've said it. I'm not ashamed of it, okay? I just like it. And I don't care if anyone thinks that, oh, God, what about a barrel-aged this, that, or the other? I really like it. I just like everything about them. And I've even, don't forget, you know, I joined Rascals in 2018, so I was a bit of a dilettante. I still am, I suppose. I don't mind admitting that. But when you begin to develop your favorite hops and you recognize a hop, that's really cool. I really like that. Like, so then, you know, if I go into a shop and I see a single hop series and it's what's Nelson Sauvin, which I really love, or Idaho 7. Idaho 7? Is it 7? Yeah, Idaho 7. I go, wow, I know that. I really like that one. That's so, you know, it's lovely educating yourself like that. I do love a stout as well. And just last night, I tried a couple of stouts of my Christmas stash, which I've already broken into, which isn't totally normal. So I had a couple of stouts, and they're really nice and robust, and you're picking out the flavors, and it's great. Like they're really good. What I don't like, which people often want to punch me in the face about, is Belgian style. I just can't really, like, you know, that wit style that's kind of like clove and banana. Emma, who's one of the co-founders of Rascals and general manager, she loves that style, absolutely loves it. And I'm like, oh, we're doing a wit, are we? But yeah, that's kind of just me. That's my own personal taste, isn't it?
We like what we like, don't we?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Do you see, being in the big city in Dublin, do you see a difference between, I don't know how many, you mentioned this, Joe, how many craft breweries are there in Dublin proper? Maybe
Dublin,
even in the county. Yeah.
Not many, 6 or 7, really quite small. For a city, I'm always quite amazed when I think about it. There's ourselves and Oh Brother and Porterhouse and there's about 6 or 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm. Do you see a difference between the more rural breweries that exist in Ireland and the urban ones, or it's pretty consistent in terms of the styles of beer they give out, the clientele, the culture? Is it pretty similar, pretty consistent, or a little bit new?
It's beautifully different everywhere. For instance, there is a brewery in Mayo, and Mayo is a county that's over in the west, the Wild West. It's one of the most beautiful landscapes you'll ever see. It's just an amazing place. It's so scenic and remote. You know, I always feel when you drive to Mayo, you cross the border into the county and you're like, oh, great, we're in Mayo. 2 hours later, you're still driving. Going, where the fuck are we? Anyway, but there's a brewery over there called Mezcan Brewing, and it's all Belgian style. And a short drive down the road in County Sligo, which is known for surfing, and it's just a cool place. There's a brewery there called White Hag, and they would do all sorts of modern beers and traditional styles. And like they had a beer last year, Peaches and Cream. It was a peach beer with lactose and milkshake pale ale. Like, it was lovely. And then you could go to Dublin, and just around the corner from us is Dot Brewing, and he does an amazing barrel aged program, you know, and like that guy is like a, you know, an alchemist. Like, he's really, you know, he's very well renowned. Like, his stuff is really complex and sophisticated. And then you could go down to Clare, and you've got a brewery called Western Herd, and they would do, you know, again, all sorts of different stuff. That guy brought out a barrel aged, or an imperial, I think it was an imperial New England IPA, or an IPA called Flora and Fauna, which everyone was raving about in the beer community in Ireland. So, and then you go up to Donegal, and you've got, you know, Donegal is the furthest reaches of Ireland in the northwest, and you know, it's an absolutely beautiful county, absolutely beautiful, but it's a very long way away, you know. And they have one of the best breweries in the country called Kinnegar Brewing, and you know, the stuff they do is just consistently really, really, really good. I've only given you a couple of names. Like, really and truly, it is wonderfully diverse throughout the country. There's the Midlands as well, like where I live in County Kildare, which is adjacent to Dublin. We've several really good breweries here. You've got breweries next door in Laois, in a place called Ballykilcavan. It's wonderfully diverse. No one sort of, there isn't a brewery that you could look at and go, oh, that's quite representative of being rural or urban or anything. No, it's just great. There's a surprise in every range.
A beautiful synopsis. That's very nice. Joe, we're coming up to our hour mark, so I definitely want to be respectful of your time, but I am very curious. I often ask this just because I'm constantly, the way my brain works, I'm constantly thinking about the future and what's going to come in the next few years. Times are a little bit uncertain. Economy's not in the greatest situation in Ireland. I mean, all over the world, but you mentioned inflation's high, things are getting more expensive. You also mentioned that the number of breweries in Ireland, I believe you mentioned, did go down a little bit. So there were some closures, some casualties. That's right. Are you optimistic, maybe looking at your industry, the industry that you're connected with? Are you optimistic, say, looking at in a 5-year lens in terms of, will there be stagnation? Will there be growth? Will there be more casualties? I'm always interested too, this idea that some folks talk about, will there be a lot of amalgamations, perhaps a lot of buyouts? Will the big behemoths come and start gobbling up the little guys a little bit more? Will we start seeing more of a pattern in this way that the market will shift? Can you give us some of your insightful and intelligent predictions on the craft beer world in Ireland, say from now until 2030?
I don't think, firstly, we're going to see too many buyouts from the big guys. So, you know, it's funny, recently there was a group, and I'm going to probably get the information wrong, but they're Little Lion Group, is it? There's a lion in the name of the group, and they'd bought up a load of craft breweries, and now they're trying to sell them again. I think one of them might have been Little Creatures in Australia. We've also seen in Ireland the parent company of a brewery called 8 Degrees. The parent company is Pernod Ricard. They are trying to sell it after acquiring it maybe 7 or 8 years ago. Maybe it's 10 years ago. So I don't think the big, you know, the Heinekens of this world, or AB InBev, Saab Miller, whatever, I don't think I think they're backing away from buying up craft breweries. I don't think that's going to happen on a large scale. I think they see that it's, possibly a bit unpredictable. There are no cash cows out there. If they buy something, they're just going to have to strip it, and inevitably you see such a backlash from people. It's hard to win back the sort of goodwill. Like, I mean, there was a brewery in Huddersfield in the UK called Magic Rock, and they were bought out. I can't remember who, and they got a lot of heat about it. And you see people saying, "Oh, the beer isn't just the same." Now, I know you could easily say, "Look, there's a few people online giving out. So what? You don't take it that seriously." I agree. You don't. You don't base everything on people giving out on Twitter. Christ, if we did that, we'd be in trouble. But I think there's no doubt that I think we've seen more instances, perhaps, of things going wrong when a macro brewery acquires a craft brewery. That's what I think. I think that seems to be the case. It'll be interesting to see what happens to Beavertown, which is the brewery owned by Logan Plant, Robert Plant's son, from Zeppelin. That was recently fully acquired by Heineken, I think. I think in Ireland you're not gonna see, unless there's like one or two breweries that have absolutely nailed, distribution, and they're turning a profit and they're making a lot of cash, and they've got a business model in place that's super efficient, neat, extremely effective, completely business focused and oriented. Like a lot of people in Irish craft beer, it's a passion project, it's a love, it's a vocation. Okay, it's not like it's not a mercenary, like, do you know what I mean? Or it's not like totally ruthlessly business focused. So there's that. Will there be amalgamations in the next 5 years? Yeah. I would see something like that happening. There could be a lot more gypsy brewing, which is when one smaller brewery will just brew in another brewery's facility. Yeah, to cut down on the cost of opening up their own brewery, or buying new vessels, or buying new tanks. So I think that'll happen. There will be more casualties. There'll be more casualties in the next 6 months. I'd be surprised if there weren't, which is awful. It's absolutely awful. These are colleagues and friends. That's the truth. Like, I mean, there's a huge solidarity among Irish craft breweries, because, to be honest, maybe it's unique, but we feel that together is the only way we can take on, the bigger. There's no point in trying to compete with each other, and we have to work together, because it's the only way we'll deal with Heineken or Diageo or whatever. So there will be more casualties, unfortunately. The cost of production, Andy, has just literally become untenable for certain breweries. And that's the worst thing about it, is that it's so out of your control. It's not that your beer was bad. It's not that you couldn't set up a good distribution network or anything like that. It's literally you couldn't afford to pay the energy bills, so that is a shame. But I think I don't see our sector growing its market share hugely in the next 5 years. I still think we're a long way from double digits, like I said, it's 3.8 now. There is room for us all to survive. We won't be getting an extension on the yacht anytime soon, or buying the Mercedes. A lot of people aren't in it for that, which is a good thing. We can get into double digits. There's things we can change ourselves in how we communicate with our customers, in how we communicate with our retail partners. We need their buy-in. If we get their buy-in, they're going to be advocates for you. Every off license needs to know as much as possible about their Irish craft suppliers. So I am optimistic about the future. I'm optimistic about the next 5 years. I think it's going to be a lot of hard work, and there won't be massive, crazy leaps in market share. But it's, like, survival is not about being strong or weak. It's about adapting to change. And we're fortunate in that, although we don't have a whole lot of money in the Irish craft beer sector, we're agile, we can pivot, we can adapt to change, we can do whatever it takes to survive. And that's kind of what we've been doing. We're like the guy on the ropes who's getting punched and all the rest of it, but he's going to win on points. He's done enough, and Like we're that. We're the scrappy fighter, and like, if that sounds a bit corny, forgive me, but we really are. Like we'll fight for ourselves, we'll fight for each other, and we're doing it because we want to do it, and we take a huge amount of pride in what we do. So I'm optimistic about the future. You know, at the end of the day, look, if you've got a roof over your head, you know, and you can enjoy a nice can of New England IPA on a Friday night, you know, life, there's so many more important things in life. You know what I mean? That's what I would say.
Survival is not about being strong or weak, but about being adaptive to change. I love that.
Yeah.
That is true, isn't it? I don't have any doubt or hesitation that Rascals, you, Joe, and your team, I'm sure, are very scrappy, and I'm sure you have a very bright future ahead of you until 2023. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Are you a soccer fan, Joe? A football fan?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Who's winning on Sunday?
I think France will win. I think France just have enough. I think Argentina are possibly too reliant on one player.
On the magic man.
Yeah, and he is magic. There's no doubt about that. He's proven himself. But I think France they're just class. They're such a quality team. And they're missing 3 or 4 of the best players in the world who are French. So having said that, I'll be proven Argentina will win 4-0. So there you go.
Well, it'll be exciting to see. I like watching Mbappe move.
Yeah,
like
he's amazing. Absolutely. He's a good guy. Yeah.
Well, Joe Donnelly from Rascals Brewing Co. in Dublin, Ireland. Joe, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to connecting hopefully again in the future. And I learned a lot about your country and the craft beer scene. And I'm always fascinated with Ireland. I've had the privilege to travel to Europe many times, and I've never been to Ireland, I'm ashamed to say. But it's a place that in my heart, and I hope to visit very, very soon. And if I do, I will let you know, and perhaps we can have a pint.
Yeah. Andy, when you're coming over, when you're coming over, we're going to give you the full brewery tour at Rascals, and we really look forward to welcoming you. And I just want to say thanks a million for having me on this podcast. It's really, really great to talk beer with people who are enthusiastic and passionate about it. So look, I hope your listeners enjoy it, and I'm sure our paths will cross again.
Cheers, Joe. Thank you so much. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all our interviews and beer-related content. Remember, craft beer is here.